Okay, I think that's ready. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Good. Welcome to you all. Welcome also to everyone attending online. We have a lot of great questions today, so we'll take as many as we can. We're okay? Okay. I think this is working. Just checking the stream. Should do this as stream health. Stream is healthy. Good. All right. As always, we'll take questions both from online students and from our local students. We'll start here. We have quite a few. First is from Ales who lives in Belarus. Wonderful. He says, I would be most grateful if you can elaborate on what does it mean to be? And what does it mean not to be? Sounds like Ales has been reading Shakespeare. That famous statement. Anyway, from a Vedantic, this is not Shakespeare, this is Vedanta. And in a Vedantic standpoint, you cannot separate being and knowing. This is fundamental to the teachings of Vedanta. If you say, what does it mean to be, in order to even ask that question, you must be a conscious being. Consciousness is equally primary to existence. To ask about be is a question about existence. From a Vedantic standpoint, existence in and of itself is not the most fundamental, but rather existence that is conscious is the most fundamental. You are a conscious being. If you weren't conscious, could you ask this question? If you didn't exist, could you ask this question? So that's the point. So in language of Advaita Vedanta, existence sat and consciousness chit. You are sat chit. You are an existent conscious being. If you say, what about Ananda? How can I be Ananda? That's what the rest of the teachings of Vedanta are meant for. So, what does it mean to be? Let me ask Alice Let me ask Alice a question, and that is, why are you asking this question? What does it mean to be? What is the motivation for asking the question? I'm going to assume the fact that you sent this question, that you're familiar with my teachings, and in general teachings of Advaita Vedanta. Teachings of Advaita Vedanta, which, when you look at them very closely, they're not specifically philosophical in nature. They deal more with human experience, and in particular, the problem of suffering. So my question to Alice is this a purely philosophical question? And it might be. Or is it based on a deeper reason? And that is the feeling of struggle and suffering in life. I think it is, and that is definitely something to be inquired into. Next question from Chris, who lives in New York. Chris says, I tend to rush towards the end goal without completing the basics, like a lot of people. Do you recommend listening to your classes on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and to learn how to restrain emotions? According to the video series you made called The Psychology of Samadhi, that should be the student's first step. To be honest, neither the teachings of Patanjali nor it was actually a very advanced topic, that psychology of samadhi. These are all advanced topics, and Chris properly points out that we need to have the basics first. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are not the basics, and this psychology of samadhi, absolutely not an introductory topic. The problem is, if you study more advanced subject matters before you have the necessary background, at best, you won't understand. At worst, you'll misunderstand. So it's really important to have the basics first. Chris found all of this on our website. Well, on the website, if you go to our website's teachings page, it gives a syllabus. And on that syllabus, there's special markings on the topics that you should study first. So my recommendation, not just to Chris, but to anyone, is if you're new to the teachings of Vedanta, begin on that syllabus with the items that are specially marked. After you've completed them, then you're ready. If you want to study the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, go for it. If you want to study psychology of samadhi, you'll understand it properly. That's the point. But begin with the basics. Next question from Arun, who lives in Bangalore. We know that the experience of sukha and dukha, sukha, pleasant experiences, dukha, unpleasant experiences. We know that these experiences are the exhaustion of karma phala. Now, that needs a little explanation, and I'm afraid might be a little mistake here. Karma phala is generally understood as results of actions you did before. Phala, the fruits of your deeds. So tell me, if I'm using a hammer and I bang my thumb, is that because of something I did in a past life? Or is it because I'm clumsy and I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing right now? So this is possibly a problem in the statement. We know that the experiences of sukha and dukha are due to the exhaustion of past karma phalas, not always. Sometimes yes, but not always. If you undergo some suffering that you didn't cause, that could certainly be attributed to something that happened earlier in this life or a past life. But if you're suffering because of something you did, if you eat a bunch of spicy food and it bothers your stomach, don't blame it on past life karma. Okay, you get the point. So experiences of sukha and dukha sometimes are due to and what he means by exhaustion, this is actually part of the doctrine of karma that I need to explain for his question to be meaningful. And that is, we are all born with certain prarabdha karmas. Prarabdha karmas are those karmas which determine this particular birth. Why were you born as a human being to such parents at a particular point in time? The karmas that determine the circumstances of your birth are called prarabdha karmas. And those prarabdha karmas, as Arun is saying here, are indeed exhausted in this lifetime. Which is to say, you are born with a certain finite amount of karma, and those karmas are exhausted throughout the life. Good karmas from your past lives, good karmas leading to watch the language here. Good karmas from your past life lead to undeserved good experiences. Does that make sense? Those words are crucial. Undeserved good experiences. The so-called bad karmas from your past life lead to undeserved negative experiences. Those are the prarabdha karmas. And throughout our life, they are being exhausted, as Arun properly says, until we run out. When you run out, you stop breathing. I mean, you breathe because of these past karmas. So your span of your life is, by the way, this is all part of a very elaborate doctrine, and I think it's important for me to make this point, a doctrine that can neither be proved nor disproved. It's a doctrine. It makes a lot of sense. Doesn't mean it's a fact. In fact, we don't know whether it's a fact or not. It is absolutely impossible to determine whether or not the doctrine of karma is true or not. So we hold it as a matter of belief, but in my opinion, it's an extremely helpful doctrine of belief. There are many beliefs that are not helpful. This is a belief that is exceedingly helpful. Now we can finish with Arun's question. We often talk about these experiences with regard to the waking state, which is to say that while you're awake, you are indeed exhausting karmas from your past life, in addition to committing new karmas and experiencing those results now in this life in the waking state. Arun's question is, do our experiences in the dream state also lead to the exhaustion of karma phala? So if you have a scary, frightening, miserable dream, you suffer. That suffering is indeed exhaustion of karma. Or if you have a really wonderful dream, that dream is also the exhaustion of karma. Basically, karma gets exhausted through experience. That's very simple. Remember that karma phala is the result of an action, and the result of action is in the form of experience. So the answer to Arun's question is yes. Okay, before I go on, I had actually forgotten, I had planned to share with you an observation at the beginning of this satsang. I think a timely observation, but I got wrapped up in the question, so let me, what do they say, a word from our sponsor. I mean to say that this is something other than the usual satsang. It's a personal observation, timely because it has to do with Shivaratri. Today is Mahashivaratri. It's morning here in New Jersey, it's evening in India. So tonight is the big celebration of Lord Shiva, and I happen to see on the internet the celebrations taking place at Sadguru's ashram in Coimbatore. He's been doing this for many years now, and it is a spectacle. Oh, it's amazing. He has, all the, it's what would you call it? A Bollywood extravaganza. How's that? and be patient with me. I mean that in a positive sense. You'll be surprised. You might be surprised by my comment here. If you've listened to me for a long time, you know that I'm not at all pleased with what Sadguru teaches. He says he hasn't studied the Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishads, and he's proud of that fact. Personally, I'm very uncomfortable with that kind of orientation, but that's him. And some of what he teaches, some of it is no doubt good, but some things that I've learned just, I don't know, they just don't work. Anyway, that's not my point here. Years ago, when I first saw his big celebrations in his Shivaratri, especially Shivaratri celebrations, I was ambivalent, but after several years, and even watching it this morning, I'm now a fan. Not exactly a fan of Sadguru, but I'm a huge fan of turning Mahashivaratri into a Bollywood extravaganza because it draws so many people into a religious, meditative, spiritual experience. So in Coimbatore, he has thousands of people in attendance, and there will be millions of people watching online or watching this celebration after the fact. That's amazing outreach. And to draw people in and to celebrate, it's fun. It's all, dramatic lighting of their big Lord Shiva that's there. Lots of wonderful music and dance. And here's an observation. A lot of the music is in Tamil, which is the local language there. He's really focusing on the spiritual needs of his local community. That's wonderful. Excellent. And just to draw that into focus, let me go on for just a few more minutes before coming back to these questions. For decades now, there have been so many people, Hindus, in this country, wringing their hands and worrying about what will happen to the second generation of Hindus coming up in America, in the United States. And they observed that the immigrant community came over. It ended up being a fairly wealthy community, so they've built over the decades thousands of Hindu temples. If you think the average cost of a temple is probably $1 million, we're talking about $1 billion plus invested in the construction of Hindu temples. Temples which the second generation of Hindus in this country, they avoid like the plague. Unless their parents drag them as little children, when they're grown adults, few of them go to these temples. And I think the comparison with what Sadguru is doing really shines a bright light on the problem. And that is the generation of the parents, they made the temples. In fact, I used to go around to those temples. I spent years traveling to these temples and giving lectures, and I would speak to the founders and organizers, and they said it again and again, that we want to preserve our traditions from India, bring them to this country, plant them here, and make it authentic so that when you go into the temple, it's just like when you were in India. When you were in India 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So what Sadguru has done is realize that modern Hindus, like this Bollywood extravaganza stuff, nothing wrong with that. If you like things more traditional, excellent. But if you prefer this Hollywood extravaganza approach to Hinduism, nothing wrong. It's like in Christian churches in this country. Same thing. There are some which are very plain, and there are some which have rock and roll groups and all kinds of, everything. So people deserve to have their differences recognized. Excellent. Anytime we recognize the difference of people and we pay special attention to individual needs, to me, that's excellent. Not just in religion and spirituality, but in every avenue of life. So to finish my comments here, the temple building community in this country has missed the boat, to use the American expression, by not making temple activities more appealing to the modern generation. So Sadguru is an excellent example of making an effort to present religious activities in a very modern and appealing manner, and perhaps that would be a good message to the temple builders and temple founders and temple committees in, maybe not just in this country, but elsewhere. Anyway, okay. What is it? Now we return you to our regularly scheduled program. Remember when TV used to be like that back in the 1960s maybe? They say, now a word from our sponsor. And then at the end, they say, now we return you to our regular. Anyway, you have to watch TV in the 1960s to appreciate that. Okay, a couple more questions here. This question comes from Sandra, who lives in Amsterdam. Was there any animal sacrifice or human sacrifice in ancient India or mentioned in the scriptures? And what about cannibalism? What was that movie? Help me here. This adventure movie, Indiana Jones, right? There was a movie called Indiana Jones, which I probably saw it, I don't remember a thing, but I think it was at least partially set in India, and at some point had cannibalism portrayed? Yeah. Mind-boggling. But it was a movie, okay. So we understand that. It probably made a lot of money. Good for them. Made the actor famous. But it was a movie, right? So they're absolutely prehistoric Mexican culture had human sacrifice. A few other world cultures, I'm not sure which, but I know there are I'm not sure if it was Mexico or elsewhere. I think Mexico. There is scientific evidence that human sacrifice was indeed practiced. Certainly not very common, but it was practiced. There is zero evidence of any kind of human sacrifice in the Hindu tradition. And what to speak of cannibalism? Okay, enough said. What about animal sacrifice? Absolutely, it's right there in the Yajur Veda. Animal sacrifice was important 4,000 years ago. Not today. So here, one thing it's easy to forget is that not only do human beings evolve, but religion itself evolves. As in fact it has to. As human beings evolve, religion better evolve, because if it doesn't keep up the human beings, it gets extinct, right? So, and there are plenty of religions that are extinct. Thank goodness that Mexican religion is extinct. So, 4,000, 3,000 years ago, we see plenty of teachings in the Yajur Veda and elsewhere that describe in detail these yajnas, rituals in which animals were indeed offered, and then the offerings were eaten afterwards. So you say, wait, what about vegetarianism? What about ahimsa? All of which became very important in a religious and cultural shift that took place about 2,500 years ago. In South Asia, about 2,500 years ago, there was a big change in thinking. 2,500 years ago, by the way, is the approximate date of Buddha. Also, for those of you familiar with the Jain tradition, the date of Mahavira. And it turns out that these Buddhist and Jain traditions arose in a society that was rapidly changing its values to go against animal sacrifice and towards ahimsa. So Hinduism also was evolving at that same time. Hinduism predated Hinduism in the sense that the religion of the Vedas predated Buddha and Mahavira. So we can say that all the religion in South Asia was all undergoing a dramatic change 2,500 years ago. And that value for ahimsa has never, we can say that the acceptance of animal sacrifice went away, but the insistence on ahimsa has not gone away. Completely present today, as valuable today as it was in the time of Buddha and Mahavira. Okay, let me turn this microphone on and see, do we have some questions here? I'll take from Ron.
Thank you. Yep, sir. Last week you had a question from a young woman in Texas about dharma and adharma. And it brought up something that I've been thinking probably the past year or so in us as spiritual seekers getting out and, you know, protesting and showing our displeasure with what's going on in society.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering if it's time for us to sort of stand up and start showing or being an example to the world on how things need to change.
Good.
And actually the last week, so something came to me, is like, is it possible? Do we have the sensibility now in this country and maybe even around the world to really do it in a way that's helpful, that really is ahimsa and adharma? Because thinking about everything that's happening, it seems like even those who are peacefully protesting and such still are not, in some sense, not properly engaging with those that are acting adharmically.
Okay, that's an excellent question. Let me try to rephrase it in very simple terms. Is it time for sincere spiritual aspirants, especially followers of Advaita Vedanta, is it time for us to be more engaged in the social realm, standing up, in your expression, standing up against the adharma that we see all around us? And it's kind of easy to see that there's a lot of adharma going on all around us. So if I understand your question correctly, is it time for us to stand up? And it's always been time for us to stand up. There has never been a time when we have an excuse not to stand up. I would agree with you entirely that spiritual communities in general don't seem highly engaged in addressing social ills. And that's a problem. And perhaps it's a big problem. On the other hand, you also, if I understood your comments correctly, you also observe that when there are protest movements that don't have a spiritual footing, they sometimes go awry. Is that kind of your point? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I got that correctly. So you make a great argument for the fact that who could be a better social reformer than those who have deep roots in following dharma. And perhaps the greatest modern example of that is Mahatma Gandhi, who was deep. You may or may not agree with his politics, I don't care, but he was deeply rooted in dharma, in particular in ahimsa. As you know, no matter how bloody partition was in India, and was horrible, and Gandhi failed. By the way, Gandhi, somehow this is an important thing for, let me just share this with you. Gandhi ended his life not only being assassinated, but he considered himself a failure. He failed to avoid the bloodshed that took place in the partition of India into India and Pakistan. And he held himself responsible for that. He considered himself a failure, but I think most historians would consider him a great success story in that India never underwent civil war. Came very close. Came this close. But, and please remember, the basic conflict was between Hindus and Muslims, also the Sikh community. But Muslims were, I think, a quarter or a third of the population. So there could have been a horrible countrywide civil war. And I think many, if not most historians, would say that Gandhi's policies were crucial in preventing that civil war from taking place. What happened was arguably a civil war of a smaller dimension, in that it happened along the border between what is now Pakistan and India. It could have been nationwide, and it wasn't. So, and I'm going to get off my soapbox here and come back. So I think Gandhi is a great and unique example of a social reformer who was deeply rooted in dharma. And God knows we could use thousands of Gandhis today. Thousands and thousands. We need it. And I don't know what is I don't know what would be the answer, how to find thousands of Gandhis. I have no idea, but we can only hope and pray that more people come forward. Okay, other questions? Okay, let me return here. We got a lot of good questions here. Next question is from Ashish, who also lives in Bangalore. According to Advaita Vedanta, is there a difference between Brahman and Atman? The short answer is not helpful. The short answer is no. But instead of taking a philosophical perspective on this question, look at it like this. You exist. In fact, this goes back to our first question. You exist. The world exists. You exist for a reason. The world exists for a reason. You exist because of an underlying fundamental reality. The world exists because of an underlying fundamental reality. Would it make any sense to say that you exist because of one fundamental reality and everything else exists because of a completely different fundamental reality? It doesn't make much sense. There is one fundamental reality because of which you and I exist as human beings, and it is the same fundamental reality because of which the universe exists. Now, we have these two different words for very specific reasons, and that is when you undergo a personal process of self-inquiry, Atma vichara. We use that word Atma. Atma means when you look within yourself to find that fundamental reality, in that context, we use the word Atma. When we look outside at the cosmos and we try to understand where did all this come from, what is the fundamental reality because of which all this exists? In that context, we use the word Brahman. It's the same fundamental reality, but from two entirely different directions or contexts. So then we'd say that Atma and Brahman describe the same fundamental reality from two different perspectives. From the perspective of the individual, the microcosm, in Sanskrit, vyashti, and then Brahman is from the macrocosmic standpoint. In Sanskrit, we call samashti. Okay. Next question is from Padma. Padma lives in... She's in India, I'm not sure exactly where. She asked a question about forgiveness, and there's quite a bit here. I seek your guidance regarding forgiveness and its place in one's inner growth. When someone causes hurt, we're often advised to forgive. What is forgiveness from a Vedantic standpoint? It's interesting. In fact, I'm thinking about it right now. I tend to translate English words back into Sanskrit. Because I think, when I study Vedanta, I think in Sanskrit. So I think, what is the Sanskrit word for forgiveness? And there are plenty of words for compassion, daya, love, prema, but forgiveness has a very specific meaning. And we can create a compound word in Sanskrit that means forgiveness, but there's no simple, direct Sanskrit word that I can think of, at least, that has exactly the same meaning as the word forgiveness. What this tells me is that forgiveness is not primary. There's something more primary. And this I think is very... Anyone who wants to understand forgiveness from a Vedantic standpoint, I think this will help a lot. Forgiveness is not the goal. What is the goal is to get rid of anger, blame, and resentment. By the way, what is forgiveness? The removal of anger, blame, and resentment. So if you express it positively, you can call it forgiveness. But alternatively, I think in a more fundamental way then, we can understand it as removing anger, blame, and resentment. Thank you. Forgiveness is not... good way of putting it. Forgiveness sounds very Vedantic, at least to me. Forgiveness is not something you get. Forgiveness is a matter of what you get rid of. You don't get forgiveness. You get rid of anger, blame, and resentment. How do we get rid of anger, blame, and resentment? There's a lot in Vedanta that can help us get, anger, blame, and resentment. It all begins with the fact that you feel injured. It begins with that, and as Padma said, it begins with hurt. Why do you get hurt? Does Satchidananda Atma get hurt? You all understand enough Vedanta to know that your fundamental nature as Atma, as Satchidananda Atma, as Satchidananda, doesn't get hurt. Doesn't get hurt by a physical weapon, nor does it get hurt. There's one weapon that's even more vicious. You know where I'm going with this. And the more vicious weapon is not something you hold with your hand. The more vicious weapon is something that's in your mouth, your tongue. So our words, as we all sadly know, our words can be extremely hurtful. Weapons, Sri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, you can't cut Atma. You can't chop it up. And you can't hurt it with weapons. Well, you can't hurt it with physical weapons or with words. In fact, much less with words. So you understand that conceptually, that Atma doesn't get hurt. Atma can't get hurt or injured. Then we have to say, then why do we feel so hurt? And this is where Vedanta kicks in. We feel hurt because of identification with our bodies and minds in general, and specifically we get identified with our roles. If you have the role of being a friend, and your best friend says something hurtful, you feel hurt because you say, I'm this person's best friend. I'm their friend. How could they be so hurtful to me? Of all people. So you get the point. Or between children and parents, there can be so much hurt. It's identification with those roles, whatever is a role, that makes you vulnerable to being hurt. When these teachings go in sufficiently, you are no longer vulnerable to being hurt. If you're not vulnerable to being hurt, you won't get angry, you won't blame the person, and you won't feel resentful. Because you've actually, you've short-circuited the problem. You've gotten in front of the problem. If you don't get hurt in the first place, where's the need for forgiveness? You get the point. If you get hurt, then you have to deal with the anger and everything else. But if you don't get hurt in the first place, then there's no need for forgiveness. This is the Vedantic solution to the problem. And let me just illustrate that, just to put this on a little bit more of an experiential basis. In the 1990s, early 1990s, I was the manager of my guru's ashram in Pennsylvania. And as manager, I was the one, if you had a problem in the ashram, you go and complain to the manager. So I was that manager. And a lot of people would come in and complain, and they had legitimate reasons to complain. And occasionally, someone would be really upset, angry, and curse me out. Because I'm the manager. I'm supposed to make everything perfect. By the way, I was a terrible manager. I did the best I could, but it wasn't that good. Anyway, so here's the scenario. I am in the manager's office, and this person starts shouting at me. Fortunately, that's a nice observation. When I became manager, my guru, Puja Swami Tadatmananda, became my management guru. And we would actually talk about how to handle these situations. Long conversations, what to do when this happens. And he taught me. And what he taught me was this. When that person is shouting at you, they're not mad at you. They're mad at the manager. That's the key. They're not mad at me. They're mad at the manager. If enough Vedanta has gone in, this works. You can't fake it. But fortunately, enough Vedanta had gone in for me. It did work. I was able to detach myself sufficiently from the role of manager, which then allowed me, usually what happens if somebody starts shouting at you, you get worked up and instead of listening to the person, you're planning your response, right? When somebody's shouting at you. And of course, if the manager responds in that way, doesn't listen to the complaint, and instead just gets ready to fire a salvo in return, it makes a bad problem worse. I learned how to avoid that, so that when a person is shouting at me, I learned to nod my head. I didn't have to struggle with anger and irritation because of what my guru had taught me. So I just listened, and then I would be able to respond by saying, okay, what can we do to help? Now, what an unusual response. After you shout at someone, do you expect that person to say, okay, how can I help you? That usually doesn't happen. But it could happen. It did happen with the help of these teachings. After being shouted at, that would be my response. What should we do? You might call that compassion. To me, it wasn't compassion at all. In fact, it was doing the job of being the manager. That's not being compassionate. It's being a good manager. I wasn't always, sometimes I was quite bad, but I'm giving you one of my, on a good day. So, okay, enough said. By the way, on forgiveness, by the way, if you have a question on any particular topic, here's a suggestion. Go to my YouTube channel and search on that topic. If you search on forgiveness, I found 3 different videos that dealt with forgiveness. So whatever topic, give it a try. You might find something helpful there. Next question from Jonathan. Jack, he says. His name is Jack. I've been reading Bhagavad Gita and learning Vedanta for 2 years. After being raised in a Baptist Christian household, by the way, Baptists are the ones for they're famous for what they call fire and brimstone. You are a sinner. You are going to hell. So Jack was raised in that culture. And he says, I still sometimes deal with guilt for not strictly adhering to the Bible. Apparently the Bible has been replaced by the Bhagavad Gita. So he feels guilty. There was so much emphasis on punishment and guilt in that Baptist religion that it kept me in a constant state of fear and shame from my past mistakes. How can I free myself of that guilt and regret that he takes with him even today from his upbringing in the Baptist church? Before responding to it, I just want to point out the fundamental issue here is how we raise children. And to raise, think about taking your 6-year-old son to church and then having the pastor say, you are an evil sinner. You're going to hell. And the 6-year-old is hearing this. How will the 6-year-old take that? 7-year-old, 8-year-old, right? Horrible. We need to pay attention, very close attention, to the kind of religious education we give to children. It is crucial. We can see how harmful it can be. Fortunately, my religious, I also went to churches. I was raised in a Roman Catholic church. My experiences were fortunately, I had some good experiences. There was something very mystical about the Roman Catholic Church. This was in the days before the Vatican II reforms, so this is the earlier version of the Catholic Church. We were in church chanting in Latin. Not surprising that I like chanting in Sanskrit today. When I grew up chanting Latin. Very, very wonderful. So I guess my point is that your childhood religious experiences are really formative in good ways or in harmful ways, as it was to Jack. How can I free myself of that guilt and regret? I don't know. And these are deeply embedded childhood experiences. For some children, such experiences can be traumatic. And psychologists talk a lot about what happens when children undergo traumatic experiences. There's something about a child's brain that makes them extremely vulnerable to these traumatic events. As adults, we deal with things much better. But for a child to undergo what psychologists would call a traumatic experience, it has some very serious consequences. So for Jack here, if that guilt and regret are manageable, I think you'll find that the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita and Advaita Vedanta will not reinforce the guilt and regret that you feel. And over a period of time, that guilt and regret can fade away. On the other hand, if Jack or someone like Jack has undergone some traumatic experiences in childhood and it has left permanent scars, in such cases, professional psychotherapy is important in those situations. Childhood trauma is a big deal. It needs professional treatment. I don't know if Jack has had that or not, but I'm just observing. Okay, a couple more questions and we'll wrap up. This question comes from Neil. Neil lives in Raleigh, North Carolina. Neil says, can we choose an ishta devata that is not traditionally within the Hindu pantheon? And he goes and he says, I have a great deal of bhakti for Jesus Christ. I often find myself gravitating and praying to Jesus as my ishta devata. Of course, I deeply love Sri Krishna, Lord Shiva, Rama, Devi, etc. But for some reason, I resonate deeply with the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. Fortunately, the Hindu tradition has a concept of bhakti which is wide enough to accommodate Neil. Let me give a more concrete example. Many of you, those of you raised in India, you know that Shirdi Sai Baba is a very popular deity. He was a guru who actually had a very strong Muslim influence. So if a Muslim-influenced human being can become an ishta devata for thousands and millions of Hindus, if that's acceptable, then what's wrong with Jesus Christ? So there's nothing fundamentally in the way of choosing Jesus or some unconventional deity as your ishta devata. By the way, when I was first introduced, as a young man, when I was first traveling in India and learning about all this, I was a little shocked when I came to learn that Shirdi Sai Baba was worshipped as God. I found that shocking. It took me some time to wrap my head around that, so to speak, and really understand the openness of spirit that we find in the Hindu bhakti tradition. Remarkable. Please tell me one other religion in the world that has that kind of openness. Doesn't exist. This is absolutely unique. Okay, one more. One more? Yeah. There are a couple of new questions just came in. Let's see what I can do here. Let's see here. Okay, this is from Jivan, who lives in Chennai. Used to be called Madras. I get to understand many spiritual teachings, but I am still unable to control my emotions. Emotions like sadness, anger. The question is, should I just be calm and stay in the awareness of my thoughts and emotions, or should I let my emotions go? Neither. Let me explain. So we've had this topic actually in several previous satsangs where I've said that the spiritual teachings don't make your emotional problems go away. They just don't. I mean, spiritual teachings empower you to deal with your emotions more gracefully. But until those spiritual teachings have transformed you sufficiently, you have to deal with those emotions. So then, if I understand Jivan's question here, should I just stay in calm awareness? I should just meditate. Or should I just let my emotions run amok, my words? And the answer is neither. Meditation doesn't solve emotional problems. Letting your emotions run amok is obviously not a good solution. The solution is deal with your emotions. A process of emotional growth is essential in a life of spiritual growth. A metaphor I gave long ago, like if you think of a ladder, there's two sides of a ladder with the rungs in between. Can you imagine? Take one side of the ladder away? It's not going to work, right? That ladder needs both sides. The ladder of life has spiritual growth on one side and emotional growth on the other side. We need them both. So that would be a message for Jivan. Don't ignore emotional problems by meditating, and don't let them run amok. Find appropriate ways to manage your emotions. And we'll take one more question here, a little long, let me see. This question comes from, oh, it's really long. Okay. I don't see a name here either. Might be Devesh, might be from India. In the second chapter, Sri Krishna encourages Arjuna to fight. Then he explains, he tells Arjuna to be a karma yogi, to act without being desirous of results. Question is, there are some verses when he's encouraging Arjuna, he tries to encourage him by talking about the results. I find this interesting, blah, blah, blah. Oh, fame versus infamy. Others will ridicule you. Okay. This, by the way, this goes on for 2 pages. So let me, I think I have the essence of the question. In the Bhagavad Gita, where Arjuna has an emotional meltdown on a battlefield in chapter 1, Lord Krishna now has a job on his hands to get Arjuna ready to go. And it's interesting that Sri Krishna, before Sri Krishna imparts powerful spiritual teachings to Arjuna, which is the ultimate solution. The ultimate solution to Arjuna's problem is to gain enlightenment, honestly. And the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita that Sri Krishna gives are meant for that purpose. But before coming to those teachings, Sri Krishna takes a different tactic. In fact, several different tactics. One is klaibhyam ma astu. He says in English, by the way, a literal translation is not suitable for public, for the public here. In loose translation, don't be a wimp. Klaibhyam ma astu. And then Sri Krishna elsewhere says that if you fail to fight in the war, people will think you're a loser. They'll think you're weak. They'll think you're a nobody. Arjuna was a highly esteemed warrior, and Arjuna would fall in esteem. And I think the question here is, why does Sri Krishna say one thing here? He says, don't be a wimp. If you leave the battlefield, everyone's going to think you're a loser. And then later, he gives us teaching on being a sthita prajna, to use the expression used here in the end of chapter 2. He says you should transcend all of this stuff. And how to reconcile the two perspectives, they're not meant to be reconciled. They're different perspectives. So notice that Sri Krishna starts with one perspective and then leaves it behind and goes to the higher perspective. So this shows one of the challenges in understanding the Bhagavad Gita or any scripture, and that is to understand any part, you have to understand the whole. So if you just read that verse, klaibhyam ma astu partha, don't be a wimp. If you just read that, then transcendence doesn't make any sense. And if you read the part on transcendence, the don't be a wimp talk doesn't make sense. You have to understand it in context, in sequence, and even, really speaking, to understand the Bhagavad, to understand the relationship between Sri Krishna and Arjuna, you have to study the Mahabharata. You have to have the bigger story. Not just in the Bhagavad Gita, is a little 700-verse sliver of a 90,000-verse epic. So in order to understand the relationship between the two, to have studied portions of the Mahabharata is essential. So from that perspective, we don't try to reconcile these two different teachings from Sri Krishna, different teachings in different contexts. Okay, I think that's enough for today. You can send me your questions by email. Helpful if you include Satsang question as the subject matter and send it to me, and then we'll take up more questions in our session next week. We'll end with a prayer. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat. See you next week.